Good morning, everybody. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm from Go for Growth. We're just going to wait a couple of seconds just to allow people to join. But just to check that you're in the right place, we are covering off today quality questions and the specification for the approved provider list for adult social care in North Yorkshire County Council. So just hang tight for a couple of seconds while we let people join. We have got a few people joining us already. And I will just go through housekeeping and some introductions in a short while. And we've still got people joining, so we'll just hang on another couple of seconds before we kick off this morning. But just in the meantime, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm joined by my colleague Lauren from Go for Growth this morning. We're your hosts for this morning's session, looking at quality questions and the specification for the approved provider list procurement for adult social care in North Yorkshire County Council. So I think we might have everybody that's coming. So I know time is a very precious commodity these days, so I will just jump straight in to housekeeping and introductions and what we're going to cover in the session this morning. So from a housekeeping perspective, we are recording the session this morning and it will be emailed out to all registrants of the session this morning. So if you haven't been able to make it, I know you won't be hearing this live, but if you haven't been able to make it, don't worry, we will send a recording, a copy of the recording out to you. We have a chat functionality and a Q&A functionality as is usual with a Zoom webinar. So Lauren will be keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A throughout the session this morning. If you want to say hi and introduce yourself, please feel free to do so on the chat. If you have a specific question that you would like us to cover, if you could use the Q&A function for that, that would be really helpful. And in the Q&A function, you can choose whether you ask the question just to myself and Lauren or to everybody. So just choose who you want to see the question, whether that's all of us or just the panelists and host. If we can, we'll go through questions live as we go through this session. We have carved out some time for Q&A towards the end. If there are questions that we don't get time for in the session this morning, then we will answer them in slower time. If there is a question that I can't answer, which does happen, we of course don't know the answer to absolutely everything. If there is a question we can't answer, we'll pop it in the car park for this session and we will take those questions away and either speak to North Yorkshire County Council if we need to, or we'll find out the answer and come back via email. And just on questions, if there are questions that are around your service delivery specifically, so what you do, or if it's around what North Yorkshire are actually trying to buy from a service perspective, or if you have pricing related questions, my advice would be to put those questions directly to North Yorkshire County Council using the messaging functionality in the Your Tender portal. So Go for Growth is here today to talk about the process of answering the approved provider list procurement. And so we're not technical experts on it in terms of the actual service itself, the service that you provide and the service that North Yorkshire are buying. So we are here just to cover process. We can always take away questions. We know what we can and can't answer. So if there is something that we need to pose to North Yorkshire on your behalf, we can do that. And that is just a little bit about, or it segues nicely into a little bit about our role within North Yorkshire County Council. So my name is Gillian Askew. I am a procurement professional by trade, and I'm one of the co-founders of Go for Growth. Go for Growth is an organisation that is designed specifically to help providers secure and find work in the public sector. And we work for a number of public sector organisations, one of which is North Yorkshire County Council, who have commissioned us on a pretty broad basis, actually, to try and support providers who aspire to work for the public sector who reside in North Yorkshire as a county area, or regardless of where an organisation resides, they aspire to work for North Yorkshire County Council as a public sector organisation. So our job is to help you navigate the processes of taking part in those opportunities. And very specifically in North Yorkshire County Council, we have been supporting the approved provider list, the APL procurement, for a few months now, probably about 6 weeks before the opportunity went live, and right the way throughout the procurement, we're here as part of that process support. The procurement itself, as you probably know, never closes specifically, so it does reopen again for the next evaluation phase 12 weeks after it actually goes live, which is planned for the 1st of November. So there are multiple opportunities, so 4 a year opportunities to be able to join the approved provider list in North Yorkshire County Council. One of the things I do need to just make clear is we are separate from North Yorkshire County Council. We're not a part of the Councillors Go for Growth. We have no role to play in the award of this procurement. So we're not part of the evaluation team, and we don't give feedback on providers. So what we're talking through today will hopefully be helpful guidance and advice and support for you, but of course it has no guarantee that it will bear any relationship really to the results in the approved provider list procurement, but hopefully it will help strengthen your submission and help demystify the procurement process a bit. And it's worth saying actually that whilst this guidance is specific to the approved provider list procurement, actually more generally, the guidance will stand you in good stead, I think, for any public sector procurement process that you might be going through or wish to go through, but also for any sort of funding application, and that includes grants and lottery funding, for example. So there's some commonality between what we'll talk through today and other processes that you might go through to secure funding now and in the future. So what we'll cover today as part of the procurement, we're going to look at some common pitfalls that all providers, us included, can often fall foul of. We're going to talk a little bit about the specification, the role that it plays and how to approach it. We'll look in detail. I've picked 3 quality questions and we'll work through how to break down those quality questions and their relationship back to the specification. And then once we've broken down the question, how we use things like the word count and the weighting and score, and how to approach putting together a response to those questions. And then we'll talk about any additional support that there is outside of today's session for providers. As I said with Q&A, please don't feel that you need to wait until the end. Lauren will be keeping an eye on it. So if you have questions as we go, please do feel free to ask. So if I move into common pitfalls, and this is regardless of the sector that we're in or the size of organisation that we are, it can often be a challenging place answering any sort of procurement process, whether that is an approved provider list, framework, contract, lottery funding application or a grant application. Those processes can often be quite difficult. And so there are some pitfalls that it's easy to just fall foul of. And if at any point you feel like I'm teaching you things that you already know, my apologies. We are looking at the real basics in this session today. So forgive me if I'm going to tell you anything that you do already know, but I think it's worth covering some of this stuff. And certainly that first thing, not answering the question, it definitely feels like it's a very obvious thing to say. However, what we're talking about in the next section is really all about reading the question, answering the question in relationship to the specification, and really making sure that we are answering the core parts of the question that the contracting authority is asking us about. And we're going to talk through the doing elements of those questions in a second. Often we can omit to submit all the documentation that's required. It can often manifest itself in a couple of ways. So if a question specifically asks for something, for example, a question might ask for a risk register or a policy as part of an evidence or a plan of some sort, then we should be making sure that we are uploading those documentations if they're required. Some of the questions, and North Yorkshire is like this, will say no additional documents are required or even allowed actually, but we should make sure that if we're asked for documentation that we submit it and make sure that we have ticked that off as part of the question. We should avoid caveating wherever possible. And caveats often come in the form of, if the price is X, then we can deliver Y. And actually that makes it really difficult for a contracting authority to appropriately evaluate your response. So we would always advise that you either limit or don't caveat your tender response in any way. It can make it really difficult for the contracting authority to evaluate. And that specification match is really what today's session is all about, but making sure that the responses that you're giving in the quality questions do show the authority how you bring to life the specification. And we'll talk a bit more about the role in the specification in a second. In terms of reusing previous bids, anybody that does any work with me for any length of time will know that actually I'm a big fan of not reinventing new documentation or reinventing wheels really for every procurement response that you might be giving. So I'm actually a big fan of reusing information wherever that's applicable and appropriate. However, it obviously comes with a bit of a health warning in that if you've been referencing any specifics that no longer match this particular process that you're going through, or if you've talked about customers, suppliers, or other references out that are no longer appropriate, make sure that whatever you're reusing, you've rechecked for compliance with the process that you're currently filling out. And usually there's a general rule in quality questions, and this isn't necessarily about additional evidences, but writing your responses so that you create an evidentiary process almost. So we're going to talk about care plans in a second. So confirming that you have care plans and confirming that they're person-centered is one thing, but actually demonstrating through your evidential narrative how you do that is much stronger response and will always elicit a higher score if you're backing up what you're saying with some examples of how you do that when you've done that, etc. And one of the things I've seen as an evaluator many times is that key information's missing. So in every quality question, regardless of whether that's for grant funding, this procurement or any procurement, it will be looking for key information. And so we'll show in the next bit actually how to break down those quality questions, but often where scores are lower than they probably could or should be is because some key information's missing. And the alter ego to that is that there's superfluous information that isn't relevant to the question. So often there'll be a word count or a page count in any kind of process. And so using those words wisely and to get maximum impact is part of the job that we have to do when we're responding to these processes. So we need to make sure that we get all the key information in and that we don't actually give any information that's irrelevant to the question. And actually, from my own experience, that can be quite frustrating, especially if you want to tell your potential customer something that you think they really need to know. But if they haven't asked you about it, we should sense check ourselves about whether we're giving key information or information that's not required. And on that word and page count, we need to make sure we don't go over it. But also we need to make sure that if we've got a 600 word count, if we're submitting a response that's 50 or 100 words, for example, that in itself will tell us that we're probably not necessarily going to be able to attract the maximum score available because we're not making use of all of the word count and page count that's available to us. So there's both sides of that we need to take into account. Never go over, because if you do, it will simply be ignored or even redacted. So the evaluator won't get to see it. But do try and use the word count to your best advantage. Again, we don't want waffle or superfluous information that's not relevant. But if you have 600 words, try and use it as best you can. And when I talk about assumptions, I mean that in two ways, really. So you may be a provider already on a contract or a procurement that's renewing. And so you may assume that your client knows you well, and they may, but you might also assume that they can take that prior knowledge into account into this new procurement process. And that's an incorrect assumption. No matter what you do every day for your current client, you can only be judged on what you write down in that process. So don't assume that they know anything. Don't assume either that the evaluator will be a technical expert. So using things like acronyms can often be quite difficult. Evaluators will not go and try and do a Google search to find out what you mean by your particular acronym. So you assume, if you like, that you have to take them on a full and unambiguous journey of what you're trying to tell them, to celebrate your best version of your services. So don't use acronyms. If you're going to use them, at least the first time you use them, spell them out. But don't assume that the evaluator knows anything about you or knows anything about the service that you give. You must tell them everything that they need to know in relationship to the question that they've asked. And then that's selection questionnaire, standard selection questionnaire compliance. Again, feels like a very obvious thing to say, but we have to be compliant in all those areas. We are doing some work in Go for Growth on standard selection questionnaire compliance specifically, so feel free to ask us outside of this about it. But that's to help people go through at the top end of the procurement process for the approved provider list. You'll have been asked lots of questions about your organisation, and there are things called mandatory disqualification and discretionary disqualification. You'll be asked about what subcontractors you're using, what your insurance levels are. Will you have the licenses and accreditations that you need to perform this work, etc. SQ compliance can be really important, because if you aren't compliant, it will limit your ability to be able to continue in that process. So if you fall foul of a mandatory disqualification element, for example, then certainly for the time being, that would mean that you couldn't continue. So we need people to get through the selection questionnaire compliance in order to be able to move on. If anybody does feel like they need some specific support on that, do just give us a shout. So it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour on areas where we can often fall down. So hopefully that's been a bit helpful for everybody. Lauren, have we got any questions or anything in the chat yet that we need to have a look at before we jump on to specification and stuff?
No, nothing at the minute.
Okay, all good. So we're going to look at quality questions. This is where we'll spend most of our time this morning, looking at the quality questions and the specification. So the role of the specification, and again, I know this sounds very obvious, but the role of the specification is for the authority to write down effectively what it is that they want to buy. And in the approved provider list, there are 4 specifications. So we've got home-based support, community-based support, residential and nursing, and we have got supported living. So volumes 3A, B, C, and D. And from my own personal experience at actually taking part in bids, and something I would always advise any potential provider to do, is to take the specification and read it in full. That's a fairly sizable job if you were applying for all of the 4 approved provider lists, less so if you're applying for just one, obviously. But as well as reading through the specification, certainly what I would normally do is I would highlight anything in the specification that I might have a question on, that I would like to go back to the authority to ask a question around, anything I don't necessarily understand, or anything that I think might be a little bit ambiguous, anything I want to double check. And I would also be looking for things that I don't necessarily have in my service that's in the specification, so I can have a think about what that means in terms of my ability to be able to deliver the full specification that they wish to buy. I would normally be looking for how much I match that specification. So once I've read it, I'll know whether really, and this is how certainly personally I make a do I want to tender this, or do I want to take part in this process or not type of go, no go question. Is that specification, is that what I do? Can I do it? Can I deliver it? Will I deliver it well? And if you're a current provider, you'll be also looking for anything that might have changed. So what do I do now under the current process? and what is this new approved provider list asking me to provide. And you can pick out core parts of it. So I have all 4 specifications in front of me that I've read through. And what we're going to do is relate those to the quality questions. Now, before I move on, I think I can see that we've got a question in the Q&A. Lauren, is that something that we need to look at now?
All it is just there's a question saying I can't see the full screen of that slide. I think it's just because you're going to go down.
Oh, no. So there's just 3 questions on here. So can you see 3 questions? Can you see 3 questions, Lauren?
I can see 3 questions. I'm just asking.
Okay. Yeah, you should just be able to see 3 questions. So not all of the quality questions are in here. I've picked 3 to work through. Because we're talking about process and not actually answering the specific question itself, the approach to the process will be relevant whichever the question is. I will come on to it in the okay, brilliant. I will come on to it in the next bit. So because we're not going to go step by step through every single question this morning, if anybody wants that kind of detailed support, we will talk you through how you can get that through Go for Growth after this session. But this session is more general in terms of the approach. So you've got the specification, you've had a look through the specification. So for example, talking about person-centred support in the community support approved provider list under 5.4 referral pathways is where you'll find actually that they're talking about care and support pathway is the operating model for how adult social care is delivered in North Yorkshire, and it includes strength-based and person-centred approaches to practice. So you should be able to relate the specification back to the question. Generally, how a procurement works is the specification is one of the leading documents, and then what the quality questions will be doing will be asking to test a certain element of that specification. For each of the quality questions that are on screen that you can see, I always advise we look for the doing elements of the question. So in that first question on care plans, I've highlighted in yellow what I think are the verb elements of the question. So the whole question is, how do you ensure care plans are individually tailored and person-centred and meet the needs of the person? Within your answer, please state how you ensure care plans are kept up to date, what measures you have in place to ensure people are involved in their care planning, and how you link with partners to ensure needs are met. So the bits that we need to be answering in there is, how do we ensure care plans are firstly individually tailored? How are they person-centred and meet the needs and outcomes of the person? How do we state that how do we keep those care plans up to date? How do we ensure that they're kept up to date? What measures have we got in place to make sure people are involved in their care planning? And how do we link out with partners to ensure those needs are met? So those are the core parts of the question that we need to be answering in our response. And if we go back to the specification, which is what I would do once I've read the question, I'll be reminding myself in the specification where it's asking for things around care plans. And it's worth noting that in the community support specification, it's actually called a support plan versus a care plan. So there's a little bit of terminology difference. But for example, in the community support approved provider list specification on page 5, what it says is the service will promote and support an individual's well-being with a view to sustaining choice, control, independence, which support the person support plan developed by the care and support team. So it's the sum of the answers that we're looking for to how we do that are in the specification already. And that's definitely creating the context of how we want to include information in our answer. Well, we've got 600 words allowed, and it has a weighting of 25%. We know we need 60% in all scored questions to be accepted onto the approved provider list. So that's a big chunk of the marks in there. And if we are writing down how we ensure our care plans are individually tailored, how they're person-centred, how they meet the needs and the outcomes of the person, how they're kept up to date, how we ensure people are involved in their care planning, and how they link with partners, those 6 core elements of the question, if we're answering each of those elements, we will almost certainly need those 600 words. And there is a bit of a reminder that in the North Yorkshire approved provider list, the quality questions, as I understand it, you only fill them out once. So if you were applying for all 4 approved provider lists, you would use your 600 words to write about that in the context of all 4. Versus if you were only applying for 1 approved provider list, then you would be writing it in the context of that one. But each of those yellowed areas, if we haven't answered those doing elements of the question, almost certainly we'll probably score lower because of it. The evaluation criteria is in the procurement document, so you know what they're looking for to score the maximum amounts. But from a functional perspective, those 6 bits, individually tailored, person-centred, needs and outcomes of the person, kept up to date, people are involved in their care planning and linking with partners, are what they want to know about. I think we've got a couple of questions, Lauren, have we? Do we need to take them now?
One definitely, yes. So just what is the meaning of partners in this context?
Yeah, so in the specification, it will tell you a little bit about who the partners are. So, for example, that might be a community, a social network. It might be, I think in the residential care one, it's quite specific. So it talks about things like dementia. Let me have a look. Yeah, so community resources, so enabling local user forums and professional networks appropriate to this area of service. This is in residential and nursing, including but not limited North Yorkshire Learning Disabilities Partnership Board, dementia-friendly communities and local emerging community partnerships. So in the specification, it might well tell you or give you some idea of what they mean by partnerships or partners to ensure that needs are met. But actually, if it doesn't say that in the specification, it's a great question to go back to clarify with North Yorkshire County Council. So if you can't find anything in the spec that helps you with that, or if you don't have an immediate answer in your head around who you're working with to ensure needs are met, then absolutely that's a great question to go back to the authority with, to ask, what do you mean by partners? Would it be this? Could it be that, etc.? And get that clarification directly from that. Hopefully that answers the question okay. What was the other question, Lauren? Should we have a look at that now or wait?
So the other one's not actually so much of a question, it's just I believe that the bed price is agreed for 5 years. This is due to rising costs and staff pay increases.
Right, okay. From a pricing perspective, that's not something I can answer, actually. That would be one that you would definitely need to pose to North Yorkshire County Council directly. And you can do that through the Your Tender portal, through the messaging functionality. What I would also say is, I feel like that question might have been asked before. So in the Your Tender portal, there is the clarification log. I think it was last updated on the 8th of August. It will be quicker to have a look in that most up-to-date clarification log to see if that question's already been asked or if that's already been discussed at all in clarification. If it hasn't asked the question, but if it has, you might get some guidance or some answers that are just a bit quicker than waiting for North Yorkshire to come back. In terms of all 3 of these questions, in essence, what I'm trying to do is work through which bits of the question do we really need to ask and to highlight the difference. So we've got a 25% weighting to that question number 1 on care plans with 600 words. And on the second question, we've got 200 words and a 15% weighting. So it will be scored, but you can see straight away that actually there's more emphasis being placed on that question around care plans there is on the question around involvement and information. There are less words attached to it and less of a scoring weighting. So when you're looking at your answers, you'll also want to be looking at that proportionality. So have have I answered, have I used my 600 words? If you've only got 50 in there, that is a clear sign that you probably haven't written enough to be able to score maximum scores. In a 200-word question, if you've used all your 200 words, but you've only used 200 words in a 600-word question, again, those things are a clear indication that from a proportionality perspective, we're not necessarily putting all our focus in the place that North Yorkshire or whoever the contracting authority have put their focus in terms of their levels of importance. But even in question 2, we can see that there are 3 elements of that question in terms of what they're asking us to write down. So how do you seek feedback about how services are going to be improved, and how do you evidence that the feedback is acted upon? So we're talking about feedback, service improvement, and evidencing that we actually do something with that feedback. And again, in the specifications, there is definitely information around feedback and involvement. There is one that is talking about best practice. So in the home-based support, for example, it says there's a requirement for providers to build on existing best industry practices in demonstrating how the views of people who use services and their families and carers are used to shape and develop services and service delivery in line with the principles set out above. This may be through an annual satisfaction survey or other innovative means of engagement and evaluation. So if you're applying for the home-based support approved provider list, there's some clear indications in the specification of what North Yorkshire County Council would look for in terms of how we ask for that feedback. And again, if you're applying to all 4, it will cover all 4. But the job that we have as respondents to these is to answer the core parts of those questions. How do we seek feedback? How do we use that feedback to improve services? And how can we evidence that that feedback has been acted upon? Taking out of the specification any contextual stuff that might be useful and helpful to that answer. Are there any other questions, Lauren, at this point?
There are, yes. So Sharon's asked, can we ask North Yorkshire County Council what we've scored so we can see which questions we need to work on the most? So I think that'd be in feedback if you request feedback from North Yorkshire, I'd assume.
Yeah, you can request feedback and you can request a score. I don't know what the protocol for North Yorkshire is in terms of giving scores, but what I'll do is I'll ask that specific question directly back to North Yorkshire. But Lauren's right, you can absolutely, in any procurement, you have the right to expect feedback. And it would be usual that you would get your score so that you can see, you might get an overall score and your individual scores. That's pretty normal. And I, as a practitioner, I would suggest that that would be really good practice, because that allows a provider to see where they need to place more focus on and where we can improve going forward. So as Lauren says, you're absolutely well within your rights to ask that question. And I will just feed back to North Yorkshire as well that question was asked in terms of score and feedback. Anything else we should answer at this point, Lauren?
Yeah, at the moment. So is your tender portal the only way to have questions answered, or is there a person, department to actually speak to? From my understanding, clarification questions should be raised via the portal, yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So in the public sector, when a procurement is live, so that they can be fair and transparent and equitable in their processes, basically so that everybody gets the same service and the same support. All questions are asked as soon as the procurement goes live. All questions are asked to go through the Your Tender portal. But again, that clarification log is really useful because the question you have might have already been asked. And what happens in that clarification process is when you ask a question, everybody gets to see the answer to that. So it all is sent out to anybody who is registered to the approved provider list, whether or not you're going to actually submit an application. So definitely yes, through the portal. Anything else, Lauren?
Well, we've actually had, in response to the feedback question, somebody had said, yes, we have received feedback and that was really useful. So you definitely can get feedback. If you've not received it, I'd maybe reach out for that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you should get feedback. It is good practice to do that in any procurement, not just this one. You should, and actually also in grant funding applications. I'm not so sure about lottery funding bids or anything like that, but you should, in a grant funding application, you should in any procurement get feedback, whether you were successful or not. So you should still get feedback, even if you've been successful around, you know, what you scored and where you were and the scores that you got. And the third question that I just wanted to pull out is question number 3, involvement in information. You can see I've highlighted it in green that it's for information only. And what that means is it doesn't form part of your score. And there is a lower word count on there, 100 words. But what I would say is, again, be proportionate in your focus. So we know that the biggest score is going to come from question number 1. Followed by question number 2 in these 3 examples. Question number 3, it's not going to affect your score. And there's only 100 words, but they do want to hear from you on it. So a 2-word answer or a 1 bullet point or a couple of bullet points also isn't necessarily the right way to go. And as with any question, there are doing parts that the authority are looking for. So how do you support participation in local community, and how do you get others involved in your service? And the same applies in the specification. They do talk about local community participation and what that might look like, and how you get others involved in your service. And there's quite a bit in the residential and nursing one, I think, around family care and end of life stuff, and how you get family involved in making some of those key decisions and the provision of your service. So again, proportionately and contextually around the specification and the approved provider list that you're applying for. But even with just 100 words and information only, my view would be proportionately do try and answer that to the best of your ability. And those are the 2 core parts of the question that that you are looking to answer, again, in relationship to the specification. So just quickly, and I know we are a little short on time, we are due to finish at 15:15. What I will just tell you a little bit about is some additional support that's on offer. I know it's really tough sometimes to come and get information through even a webinar, and they're usually fast-paced, and we definitely have been today. So we have got some video tutorials and guides, and this will come out on email for you. So you can go to our video library. And actually, Lauren has just put together playlists on our YouTube channel. So if you go to the playlist button when you get there, you can see videos aligned to finding opportunities, to bidding, to all the different bits and pieces of the process. There's nearly 90 videos in there. So the playlist is a good way of very easily getting to the right support for you. But also, you can have a one-to-one session with either myself or Lauren if you would like. You can book that directly into our calendars with the link that's up there. We are funded by North Yorkshire County Council, so any of the support that we give, you don't pay for, and we are happy to try and help. It's all process related. So again, we can't answer pricing questions. We can't tell you about how best to deliver your service. You're the expert in that, but we can hopefully try and help you reflect that as well as possible through the application process. So if you do feel that you would like to have a chat, or just a catch up, or to really go through some questions in more detail, to sense check what you want to write down, we would be more than happy to try and help if that was useful. And the final thing I'll just leave on screen is our contact details. You can book into our calendars on the link before, but if you did just want to give either one of us a ring, or drop us an email, or go to our social media, all our contact details are on screen, and I'll leave them on screen while we have a think about the final questions, if there are any. But hopefully, whilst that's been quite speedy this morning, hopefully that might have been a useful look at how to use the specification in relationship to quality questions, how to break down the quality question, and how to approach structuring a response. Lauren, have we got any questions that are left still to answer?
Yes, yeah, and another one's just come through. So we've got, please also ask when we will receive formal notification of unsuccessful application.
Okay, yeah. I think they notify as soon as they know, but I will double check. I don't know if they're holding on to a date of letting people know whether they're successful or not. I will ask that question and we'll answer it in the email when we send out the slide deck and the webinar video for today.
Cool. So there's a question. So I went straight to North Yorkshire County Council when I was informed that I had to resubmit my application. They advised through the portal. I did so and have been told they did not receive it. This can't be possible, surely. So are you just a little confused on the question? Are you saying that you've resubmitted your bid and North Yorkshire have said that they haven't received that? If you just want to pop in either the chat function or the Q&A. And whilst we wait for that, shall I move on to the next question, Jill?
Yeah.
So is the contract award still due on 18th of October 2022, as we've not had any tender outcome information yet?
That's my understanding, yes. Certainly North Yorkshire haven't told us that that date has moved, but what I will do, as I'm checking when people are going to be notified, I'll check that date of 18th of October. The contract start date, as we understand, or the approved provider list start date, as we understand it, is still the 1st of November, but I'll check that as well.
Okay. Susie's come back and said, no, I asked for feedback.
Through the portal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
they said they'd not received it.
Yeah, right, okay. Susie, do you want to actually contact me just so I can understand you a little bit better, and we can mention that to North Yorkshire, because I'm sure they'd be familiar if you have been speaking with them.
Yeah, that feels like a good idea if that's okay with you, Susie. You're right, though, in effect, if you're doing anything through the portal, that should be a foolproof way of making sure that your query goes in and doesn't get missed or lost. So if you have asked for feedback through the portal and been told that they haven't received that feedback request through the portal, then yeah, I think that's something that we would definitely want to take to the authority directly. But if you are happy to catch up with Lauren so we can get all the details, that would be great.
Great. Okay, so next question then. So this is the first time we've been asked to tender. We went through the tender documents and we could not make our service fit into any of the 4 categories. Is this something we can discuss with you separately? Yeah, absolutely. If you want to get in touch with either myself or Jill on the details that are on screen, that's no problem.
Yeah, of course. But my advice would be book one of the one-to-one sessions that we have through the calendar when the link comes out, and yeah, let's have a chat about that. When I'm reviewing a specification, there is that go no go decision, and I've made it no go a number of times myself as on behalf of my own organisation. And it's a very subjective call in terms of how close to the specification or how far away from the specification you are. So let's have a chat about it and let's see if we can help you in any way.
Brilliant. Okay, so next question then is, are we still expecting that the tender process will open again in 3 months, and is this definite?
Yes, it is, and yes, we are. So yes, there is absolutely nothing from North Yorkshire to suggest that this is being run any differently at all. It will open, in my understanding, every 12 weeks for evaluation. So that doesn't mean that you can't submit at any time. You can. But they will be formally evaluating every 12 weeks, starting from the beginning of October when the approved provider list actually goes live. November, excuse me. And in addition to that, if there is an urgent need, they would work with providers to join the approved provider list based on that urgent need. So what they won't do is constrain service need based on the approved provider list process. They won't make somebody wait 3 months to get a service that is urgently needed, but they will require any provider, whether it's an emergency urgent need or not, to be on the approved provider list before they can actually provide the services to new clients from the 1st of November. So those are the 2 ways that it will work. But yes, it's definitely staying open, and no changes that I know of anyway of it being anything different to every 12 weeks, every 3 months.
That seems to be it for questions at the minute.
Okay, brilliant. And that is actually almost exactly to time. So All that remains for me to say is thank you. I know that the processes can be challenging and complicated in public sector. Go for Growth is here to help. So do genuinely get in touch with us if we can be of any support. And thank you for taking time out of your busy calendars to join us this morning. We'll get all of the information out to you today if we can, or at the very latest, it will be Monday next week. Do have a good Friday, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.